Metroid fans, they can absorb the blow and try again later. However, for an up-and-coming development studio, this was a make-it-or-break-it kind of project. Rather than taking the risk, they declined to develop the game, stating that they didn't think they could top Super Metroid. During this lull, a new development studio was being formed in the heart of Texas. Iguana Entertainment were killing it on the N64 at the time with the highly acclaimed Turok series. Nintendo remained supportive of the team's efforts, and the companies eventually developed a partnership. Iguana founder Jeff Spangenberg eventually left the company in order to form a new studio and work hand-in-hand with Nintendo. Enter Retro Studios, a new development team devoted to creating games for a mature audience on Nintendo console in order to mirror Turok's success. Throughout 1999, the studio worked on multiple projects: an RPG called Great Blade, a football simulator called NFL Retro Football, a car combat game akin to Twisted Metal, and an action-adventure game that only had a prototype engine and some concept art background. None of these projects really impressed Nintendo, and things began to fall behind schedule despite their workforce constantly expanding. In 2000, Shigeru Miyamoto visited Retro Studios. Like the other Nintendo executives, he was disappointed in how engine. That is, until he saw their action-adventure game engine, it was a rudimentary first-person engine that could be used for anything, really. And despite not being fond of the other projects at Retro, something about that first-person engine gave him an idea. Sometime later, Nintendo and Retro were deliberating on what was next with the studio. Supposedly out of nowhere, Miyamoto-san said, "How about Metroid?" He suggested using the first-person engine to create a Metroid game. From there, things began to cohere for Retro. After receiving some valuable feedback, their initial pass for a Metroid game to that engine convinced Shigeru Miyamoto to hand the studio the Metroid license, and the clock began to tick. This all occurred shortly before Space War 2000, where Nintendo would officially reveal the GameCube. There were a few demonstrations for games that could potentially appear on the console. Of course, some of them were just technical showcases. With that said, Nintendo's eagerness to show anything for Metroid after 8 years of silence is key, and it garnered a ton of attention. Nintendo must have had a great deal of confidence in Retro despite their troubled beginnings. So much so that Nintendo confirmed a GameCube Metroid game was in development shortly after Space War, and it was expected to be playable in 2001. Little to perception of the product. It soon became public knowledge that the next Metroid was in production, and people were skeptical on how they would make the series, especially after early gameplay. But the truth is, Retro was going to great lengths to make sure it didn't look like your average first-person shooter. Metroid didn't become famous for its platforming elements. It was revered for its exploration, and that same philosophy is what drove Retro back then. Here's some insight from Retro CEO Michael Kalbach. Making a first-person shooter would have been a cheap and easy way to go, but making sure the themes and concepts of Metroid were kept was something that we wanted to do, and translating those things into 3D was a real challenge. For example, translating the Morph Ball was one of the hardest things to do. The Morph Ball was a crucial turning point in the game's development. In addition to first-person, Retro also experimented with a third-person perspective, but several people, including Miyamoto-san, corroborated on the fact that it was too clunky to shoot at a surface angle. The Morph Ball pulling the camera out of Samus's body stuck, though, and Retro glitched out the physics engine to its benefit. Eventually, producer Hansuke Tanabe found out how the ball was controlled, and he saw how it was interacting with the world. Going through tubes, solving mazes, boosting in half-pipes, and ramping up to a bigger and insane. At that moment, he knew Retro had something special. The team continued to grab the games and gave them another step in this level of something. It was painful, and they were punching hard in Nintendo's firm deadline of Christmas 2002. Mind you, they were working this hard against the contender Metroid fanbase held for this product. They didn't feel like any of this was going to work out for both sides. Even though Nintendo remained supportive of the studio, Retro Studios didn't literally play off some of the game's development. The games were looking. Then the reviews came out. Yeah. Metroid Prime was released on November 17th, 2002, to near unanimous acclaim, on the same day as all two original 2D Metroid. Both games took the world by storm, and Metroid fans were clueless. The series was back, and it was here to stay. Now, let's take a look at Retro Studios' debut title.
My name's Sensei. It's been 10 years since I destroyed
the first impression in games on the Wii. Since the very beginning, that has been true. Upon turning on the original Metroid, you hear this foreboding, followed by a distinct hum. This melody will forever capture the essence of Metroid, or mystery, exploration, contemplation. Something in Metroid's caliber is brand new.
That's bizarre.
So, this title screen and its concept alone were enough to leave a lasting impact on the industry. Super Metroid expands on this exponentially. You have these grim hands of ridiculous research labs, Metroid shrinks the earth, sternly user base, and the title screen fades in and you cross an immense scientist game. Determined that Super Metroid First Impression doesn't leave the title's window. Its first moments take you from the remains of a research station, getting used to the controls and navigation, until you come face to face with Ricky, perched atop the Navy Metroid container. You're then asked to fight hopelessly against its still lonesome base, before the research station indicates its self-destruct sequence and you need to get the heck out of there. The rest of the game is very good. The intro sums up the game's narrative, mechanics, and its goal that you can work towards and explore different things. It's an inviting, fast-paced way to introduce the player to the world of Super Metroid. The series would continue to build upon the strong foundation of Super Metroid's first hits, starting with Metroid Prime. The Super Nintendo's audio capabilities were to be designed, not a rip, and only a handful of composers were able to understand this. One of these people was Kenji Yamamoto, the composer for Super Metroid. The man understood how to utilize these 16-bit samples to create atmospheric pieces. It wasn't his battle music that would be explored in terms. The question now is, how's Metroid supposed to sound the same? A lot of Super Metroid's soundtrack came from its subtlety. What could Yamamoto-san do to put one people away and scream Metroid? Well, as soon as the title screen faded in, the world was given its answer. I know you've heard this theme already, but why don't we take another listen? These intimidating glitches there's no crowd, somber echo, or the percussion kicks in. I think a ton of people do one kind of game for it. As soon as you hit start, you hear the Metroid Prime theme for the first time. One of Kenji Yamamoto's finest compositions. Introduces an inviting and mysterious melody of the instrumentation of the game, character and the atmosphere of the story. Kenji Yamamoto's instrumentation in Metroid Prime doesn't come much. It's also late. Despite the limited quality of the Super Nintendo, he was limited to certain sounds and instruments. So, what did he do? He used instruments that only work when synthesized. Just like Super Metroid, he is designing the implementation, not a rip. These two pieces sound like science fiction incarnate, and they are brilliant imitation of Metroid fans and fans of video games in general. Of course, the title screen is only a small portion of why Metroid Prime's introduction works. The first level may not be as iconic as Super Metroid's confrontation with Ridley, but it packs so much into its runtime that I prefer it. It makes sense that a shift in perspective would cause players to feel a bit overwhelmed, so Metroid Prime's tutorial gives players both a hands-on demonstration of its mechanics and a taste of the top. The tutorial will actually allow you to bridge into a full analysis of the game, so that's good. As soon as you land for Samus's arrival for the first time, your first task is to disable this force. This is where Metroid Prime's feature is brought into question, as it contains a lock-on loop. See only in certain situations that Super Metroid asks you to properly aim shots, and that amounted to sending a disciplined phrase out or using the shoulder button to take out above you, or another scenario along those lines. Things were a lot simpler when there wasn't a Z-axis to worry about. However, rather than completely shifting inside of Metroid Prime into a mixed territory, Metroid Prime is lock-on communications that nothing gets in between you and combat can focus on dodging and finding efficient solutions. For example, freezing an enemy with the ice beam and blasting them away with a missile. Draining a powerful enemy's health with the wave buster so you can focus on the others. It'll do this while dodging attacks from enemies by pressing the jump button. This is taught most effectively in the battle with the Parasite, in which you'll need to keep yourself positioned and have a shield so you can fire through you. Problem solving and quick reflexes in combat have always been at the heart of it, and Retro managed to adapt it beautifully. Granted, it's hard to ignore the influence of an FPS entirely. I mean, after all, most of these people worked on first-person shooters before coming to Retro. There are still instances where using free aims can benefit you, which is taught in this first movie too. There are some enemies and boss fights where free aim is going to be of great use to you, like the swarm of bugs and such, and this applies to puzzle-solving scenarios as well. But because free aim is utilized so selectively based on situations that call for it, or your own ingenuity coming to play, or perhaps you're just surveying the world around you, it still feels like an advantage to the spirit of Metro. It's another means of dealing with enemies and interacting with them. Metroid Prime's controls and combat definitely changed these expectations about conceptual function and gracefully transition the series' combat into third. Something else that becomes vital to Metroid Prime's design is the scan visor. Here it's used to activate doors, elevators, what have you. But you can also scan non-essential orange panels that'll inform you of the previous situation, its backstory, and the fates of the space pirates that were to it. The scan visor will help you find that missing piece of the puzzle and give you the scan. But it's also an example of discovery in an inactive mirror. Okay, so what the heck is that? Well, let's fast forward a few years to Breath of the Wild. All of its events took place 100 years before you took control of Link, and your discovery of how events unfold come from locating where each memory took place. That's a modern, well-known example of how it's been implemented in a video game. However, Breath of the Wild is also an entirely non-linear game, so your timeline of events could be all over the place, and your context to these cutscenes might not be as strong. Of course, there's far more to it than that, but that's a video for another day. The point is, it's an essential part of Metroid Prime's storytelling, and it works in the game's favor due to it having strength and progression. You may be going all over the world, but there's still only one correct path to take. Each area tells a story as long as you decide to fit into it. Chozo Ruins tells the tale of the Chozo species, Final Monster Nom. Glitches coming from cash off the space. Speaking of which, Phazon Mines tells the tale of space pirates mining Phazon and getting mutated beasts, fighting targeted sailors, and you can even discover the origins of the game's namesake. Phazon Mines has a few overt narrative devices that go beyond the scan visor, like mutated beasts attacking you with environmental storytelling along the same lines, and the scan visor gives you context. The point is, the scan visor is just as much a part of the game's design as it is integral to its storytelling. Visors in general are a mechanic unique to Metroid. They aim to take advantage of a shift in perspective. While mostly situational, the thermal and X-ray islands change the number of proximity, for instance. You'll be able to see in the dark, tracking points, and you can spawn enemies or enemies containing using platforms and hazards and zebra holes to make yourself survivors. Generally, these accentuate the detailed Retro is put into a world of Metroid Prime. You've got clues and lore everywhere you look thanks to the visor additions, and I love them. Speaking of alternative weapons, there are also 3 beams for you to rely on in the course of the game. Wave beam, plasma beam, and place beam, and you can switch between the 3 for will. Charged shots from each of these beams will paralyze, freeze, or burn certain enemies, so you can see why you have the ability to switch between the beams. An ice blast won't work well if you're on a so good luck using a plasma beam. Actually, speed plasma. So you can see this in the video. So you can do strategies on the space bar, plastic or freezing enemies and then shattering them like I mentioned before. You can grab upgrades for each of the beams that require resources. So there's a huge incentive for exploration. Beam strategy is a big reason combat in Metroid Prime feels so aside from what we've discussed already. Enemies will press down on you, circle streaking around them, and 40 shots into them to take forever. You're always looking for a quick way to deal with even the toughest enemies, and that contributes to consistent engagement. I do get sick of getting locked in a room with space pirates or Chozo ghosts, as they take forever to kill. The ghosts jump all over the place, requiring you to constantly switch visors. Still, this new selection of enemies and bosses drive you. It's great at setting you up for each one situation. Did you learn about versions? Visor? Use that knowledge to kill targets. Use Striker after enemy enforced launch point. Use that skill to kill Shinnok. Speaking of setting you up, you're given a taste of what's to come in Metroid. Contrary to Super Metroid, Prime's first level gives you access to the ability to come across later. You'll be able to play play around with the charge beam, missiles, the space jump, and even the grapple beam when situations call for it. And all of these instances are laid out incrementally in this short time frame. Then, after defeating the Parasite Queen, you'll need to track your way through the friggin' Forge Explosions and without the items you have before. Intriguing introduction, mechanical intro, boss fight, escape sequence. A revised and version of Super Metroid's tutorial that sets you up for greatness in every way. The only thing left to be introduced as you land on Talon 4 is Metroid Prime's atmosphere. The atmosphere has always been a huge part of Metroid, for reasons we've discussed. Super Metroid broke the mold when it came to video game atmosphere, and the loss of subtlety when shifting and moving would have sucked. But instead, Metroid Prime is often remembered for how captivating the atmosphere is. The Talon overworld is such a stark contrast to the evil and fools pounding through. The music is a soothing take on the Red Star Dome. The textures are washed out yet eye-popping at the same time, and the rain magnifies the diversity of the it's all such a... It's diversity of perceivers. I just want to lie down in the grass and relax in the serenity. The advent of 3D graphics, the shift in perspective, and the high-quality sounds capable of playback on this all make for a huge jump for the Metroid series. The first level, Chozo Ruins, takes you through the mysterious remains of alien species. You might think that's sand due to the place decaying and lying dormant. Some have theorized that it's actually dust. It would be an amazing detail to pay attention to capture this military tree. Kenji Yamamoto used made percussion pairs and electronic melodies to drive the exploration. And it's a nice way to put a memorable melody into an piece. As you delve into the heart of the Chozo Rivers, you find an elegant caverns, as opposed to the lush greens and glowing pink. This level is even playable. Person, totally has only credentials. The purple is needed. Kenji Yamamoto recreated the Norfair ancient ruins in the intro Super Metroid. To escape the confines of the planet's you'll find Metroid's Rifts, the Metroid level that resonates with me most. It's the only level that's completely disconnected from the Talon and I appreciate it. After such a hard onslaught, it's nice to be rewarded by beautiful levels, with white snow, and a beautiful background to accompany. That piano piece set to those trademark Metroid Prime space themes. Feel right at home, yet like another world at the same time. After completing the level's first objective and wrapping back around, Ridley flies overhead, reminding you of what you're working towards in the grim context of those doors. Speaking of which, a phase on Mines. We've talked about how the narrative unfolds here, but this place is sinister as all. What do you think? It's here where I think I died the most in Metroid Prime, and where I noticed how distressing Samus' death scripts is. It filled me with this sense of guilt, as if I was responsible considering how capable Samus actually is. Fun fact about the death scream, it was recorded by a separate actress. Apparently it was because audio lead wanted to go for a higher register on the screen, and he went with the screen recorded by an actress with the initial The game has moments that take my breath away every single time it's played. Like investigating the Chozo chapter for the first time, as that lovely choir sweeping me off my feet. Landing underwater with the gravity suit only realize you're traversing the terrain you once infiltrated above the moon, as this European piano piece takes over. never misses a beat, and it proved to the world that a jump in technology would do away with Super Metroid's quaint and unique atmosphere. If anything, it respects what a Super Nintendo game was able to do, and recaptured them, while pulling out all the stops. It results in a game you just can't help but enjoy at first. And I think that's something a true Metroidvania should strive for. It is in their nature to feel like a giant maze, so if there are things the game can do to make your time better, that's worth it regardless. Most levels even have alternate tracks that play with bar moves. Introna Drift Steps, for example, have much more percussion to emphasize the level's shifting pace and challenge. To be like an entirely separate life, and I think this road that you gradually ascend, with the music barely resembling what you once associated with the character. That's something that lost in Metroid Prime 2. It reveals several significant lyrics that you wouldn't expect, while simultaneously introducing new story influence. Making any utilized skills can branch off and connect in ways that previously possible. Doors can be placed at any coordinate, and can introduce challenges based around 3D concepts, such as anything involving waterfall, 3D platform, rotating tools, scanning criteria, all of the work, etc. It's both new and exciting for Metroid and yet familiar. Mind you, this was also a very early attempt at creating a fundamental Metroidvania, so the game requires you to travel separately from the graphic or web story, so the advances of the base. Its structure enables very simple, meaning that you'll continue climbing down until you reach the bottom, with elevators that reach the surface and ultimate purpose. While this structure can create a game that almost worry about two-dimensional play, it can be problematic with 3D levels. First, let's take a look at how each level connects. At first, only one elevator will lead you to Talon, but you'll eventually uncover a one-stop shop with Talon underground. One of the elevators connected to this room takes you to the Sunken Frigate, the other buries you in the depths of the ocean. This, however, connects conveniently to Phazon Mines. So that's the first, but let's dig a bit deeper. Chozo Ruins will also hook you up with Caverns, which is a long stretch of land that contains the only two elevators between the drifts, and they're placed at opposite ends of the level, which makes backtracking a bit darker so take the net. There is at least an elevator in Talon that cuts your travel time in half. These connecting paths seem pretty fair at first glance, and progression seems to follow a great rhythm between each area. Your time in Phendrana is concentrated, and you rarely have to return to the area for new items. Usually, it's shortcuts and optimization for knowledge of the area can carry you towards power collecting and backtracking. I, however, cannot say the same for Phazon Mines. There are two elevators, one at the top of the level and one at the bottom. In between, there's a little bit of hell. Spider-Man traps, mainly infested rooms, enemies that keep blocking you in rooms, puzzles that reset upon leaving and re-entering the area. It's a mix. I love the atmosphere of Phazon Mines, but not love the enjoy easy. An initial run of the level will provide you with some tense action, fun puzzle solving, and great area, but the magic quickly fades when you return to grab some items you missed. Unfortunately, travel time is a huge issue in Metroid Prime's level design. Sometimes, no matter how they try to alleviate the issue with elevators and shortcuts, it's an inescapable problem. Chozo Ruins, despite its vast amount of path to take and endless amounts of secrets to uncover, its structure means that a ton of backtracking can take place throughout the game, and it's inevitable. Even small optimizations will be cut. There's a lot of backtracking to record. There's no speed booster here due to the disorientation that would ensue. While the morph wall is much faster than trekking on foot, you can't use it seamlessly throughout each room. You'll have to pop out at some point. The point I'm trying to make here is that pathfinding weighs heavily on the player in Metroidvania. Finding the route you need to take is rewarding in its own way, as it always has been. And the same goes for finding secrets and evidence. But due to this axis multiplying the number of paths to take, and due to the structure of some levels being the kind of mission on, it can sometimes result in frustration. Obtain needing to turn in paths. scaling phase online. I'm not against the idea of running into dead ends when exploring the network. Dead ends can still convey new information that will come in handy as you obtain further evidence. What bugs me is the journey required of you to travel between waypoints, and that issue is accentuated through the stake that you have to start with. It also doesn't help that as you expand your arsenal, most enemies aren't fairly challenged at all, so you can just blast the rocks mindlessly. Of course, they took note of this, and that's why when I'm forced to confront enemies like Space Pirate and Chosen Ghosts, I'm pretty. But I am willing to forgive Retro for all of these things. After all, this was one of the earliest attempts at transitioning the genre into 3D, so those lingering issues were going to be carried over. Both 2D and 3D Metroidvanias have since figured out ways to diminish backtracking, both in connected and segmented maps. Metroid Fusion, which was released on the same day as Prime, had a room at the top that contained elevators to each sector, and those sectors can connect with each other. It's seamless, engaging, and you have an easy method of retreating back to the surface and going somewhere else. So the genre was seeing attempts at streamlining exploration, and as the Prime trilogy went on, it experimented with family taste. You'll see what I mean. I think if we resupply and a few others to remove Metroid Prime's backtracking problem is because of the endgame quest, the hunt for the Chozo articles. I often compare its inclusion to something like the Triforce Star Questing. They both make themselves apparent at the very end of the game, although they can both be completed throughout the playthrough with light items. However, whereas Wind Waker requires you to fork over 3,000 rupees in order to decipher the damn charts, Metroid Prime 1 requires that you stumble upon the Chozo Temple, which is a work in and of itself, and then scan the statues to gain proof of the whereabouts of the articles. You can do this at virtually any point in the game, and it allows you to venture off the beaten path whenever you feel like you're in the proximity of one of those pesky beams. Of course, not everyone's going to know about these things until the end of the game, so that's why it further accentuates the issue. And even then, some of the Chozo artifacts can only be grabbed after obtaining late-game upgrades like the Phazon suit, so you'll be doing a lot of running around regardless. Even so, I think this quest is a welcome addition to the game. There is discussion to be had when analyzing collectibles and pieces for energy tanks in a game like Zelda. If, by the end of the game, your only objective is to kill the final boss, why should you feel obliged to collect all these items? Because the boss is going to be hard. Sure, there's no strategic required to get the moves. Only in hindsight will you be able to determine whether or not that actually becomes worth it. Thus, we're left with another question. Is collecting the items fun and rewarding? Well, not every energy tank is a winner. Some missile expansions are just right for the taking, but I'd say they succeeded in the long run. Metroid Prime does a great job of conveying environmental conflict, and the scan visor feature will assist you in recovering information. Once you find something unique, investigate it, and keep that in the back burner until you find yourself in that area you need to expand your arsenal and get excited to check out more of each area. The spirit of Metroid lives within Prime, for sure. Not only did I have an opportunity to play differently, it was fun and challenging to pursue. It's funny. The overall structure of Metroid Prime may have its own problems, but the game gives you so many opportunities to live in the sequence. It's a giant, confusing maze. It's a maze that I don't even want to find the exit from. I just want to keep challenging myself to find different. Rerouting myself in this jungle shows a artifacts and solving puzzles along the way. Metroid Prime, despite its missteps of being the first of its kind, is one of the most engaging, intelligent, intense, and immersive video games I ever played. And by the way, yes, we'll be able to this final boss fight. First of all, in 1800, focusing his weapons isn't easy. They'll constantly fly away if you can't keep using it damaged. If the time for shots just right, go down. The actual final boss fight with the game's namesake is insane. It'll switch between the four beam types and you'll need to deal consistent damage while it viciously assaults you. This is why the beam upgrades are come in handy. Game buffs Melton's helmet. Using these beam upgrades works distance too. Yeah, you'll probably see that inside of the sneakers. The final phase has you avoiding the devastating damage it can deal, and killing its baby Metroids while you find tools and Phazon endurance. Spam the A button like left to hit the moves it does. You gotta switch visors, manage multiple hazards. It's an insane test of endurance, but it feels amazing to finally kill you. So, us and even though I already subscribed for the clock, final boss will be from Sting. This is an incredible game. To this day, I still love revisiting it, despite 3D Metroidvanias essentially being born with this first step. It has this whole, this timeless implication of this. Its combat, despite being so early on, is fleshed out and inconvenient. Some design is sped up the steps, community love our eventually. This is not being powerful, it is more fast language, respect, and it's something that you can learn. I told the games at least, it's what driving as a child, and looking back on its day, it holds up pretty damn well. It's no wonder it has success. As of December 2014, the GameCube version alone was sold just under 3 million units, making it the well than the game. It also remains one of the best games in the city. It's one thing for me to say that Prime launched the entrance, it's marketing entrance for different sweet. That's why it was a surprise when Nintendo announced the sequel in there. For Metroid Prime 2, Retro had far more creative, and that meant a few errors on the game. Sneak between the game we want to make the game crossing in the game, and tap the ideas for seeing discovery. We also but perhaps most important changes I alluded to this change in the file that my analysis of files, and I think the change themselves. Against the strict deadline, Metroid Prime 2 was just 2 years after the first game, on November 18, 2000. Metroid Prime 2 wasn't aiming to be like those games. Retro just wanted to make the best damn Metroid game, and not worry about it because the GameCube era wasn't the most lucrative generation for Nintendo, as their partnerships were slipping by wholesale. Despite that, want to make Nintendo's game which made this game 7. That's why Nintendo launched the campaign that did Sakurai Nintendo School behind that game. It's funny, maybe still gains when it comes to conspiracy theories or Illuminati that hosting grainy footage of Prime 2 as if it was footage of it. There was even a direct call out in the domain I Love Being stuff.